Hi everyone! Have you ever been working with Next.js and Clerk and suddenly hit a wall with an error message like ClerkInstanceContext not found? It's a frustrating error that many developers encounter, especially when integrating Clerk for authentication in a Next.js application. Today, we're going to dive deep into what causes this error and, more importantly, how to fix it quickly so you can get back to building amazing things. This error basically means that Clerk, your authentication provider, can't find its essential setup within your application. Clerk relies on something called a React context to manage user sessions and authentication states across your components. When this context isn't properly provided or accessible, you get this not found message. Let's break down the common culprits and their solutions. First, and most frequently, the issue is a missing or incorrectly placed ClerkProvider. Clerk needs to wrap your entire application, or at least the parts that require authentication. In Next.js app router, this usually means placing ClerkProvider in your root layout.tsx file. Make sure it wraps your children prop. For example, your layout.tsx should look something like import ClerkProvider from at clerk/Nextjs, export default function root layout, children, return, ClerkProvider children, /ClerkProvider. If you're using the pages router, you'd typically place ClerkProvider in your _app.js file. Double-check this setup. It's the foundation of Clerk's operation. Secondly, consider your middleware.ts file. While not directly causing the Clerk instance context error itself, an improperly configured middleware can lead to unexpected rendering issues that expose this problem. Ensure your middleware.ts is correctly set up to protect routes, but also allows Clerk to initialize. If your middleware redirects before Clerk can establish its context, you might see this error. Make sure your public routes array is correctly defined to allow access to necessary paths, like your sign-in or sign-up pages, without authentication. Another common source of this error, especially with the Next.js app router, involves client-side versus server-side rendering. Clerk components and hooks often need to run on the client side because they interact with the browser's local storage and network for authentication. If you're trying to use Clerk hooks like useUser or useAuth in a component that's rendered exclusively on the server, you'll encounter this error. The solution here is simple. Add useClient at the very top of your component file. This directive tells Next.js to render that component on the client side, allowing Clerk to find its context. Remember, the ClerkProvider itself can be rendered on the server, but components that consume the context must be client components. Sometimes, environment variables can be the sneaky culprit. Clerk needs your next_public_clerk_publishable_key and clerk_secret_key to function correctly. If these are missing or misconfigured in your .env.local file, Clerk might fail to initialize properly, leading to context issues. Always ensure these keys are present and correctly formatted, especially next_public_clerk_publishable_key, which is used on the client side. Finally, hydration errors can also manifest as Clerk instance context not found. Hydration happens when Next.js tries to match the server-rendered HTML with the client-side React component tree. If there's a mismatch, often due to Clerk components expecting client-side data that wasn't available during server rendering, you can see this error. Ensuring your ClerkProvider is correctly placed and using useClient where necessary usually resolves these hydration-related problems. Always make sure your client components are indeed marked with useClient when they rely on client-side specific APIs or contexts like Clerk's. So, to summarize, check your ClerkProvider placement in layout.tsx or _app.js, verify your middleware.ts configuration, make sure client-side components using Clerk hooks have useClient, confirm your environment variables are set, and be mindful of potential hydration mismatches. By systematically going through these points, you should be able to resolve the Clerk instance context not found error in your Next.js application. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you solve that tricky Clerk error. If it did, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel for more helpful tutorials and tips. Your support really helps me create more content like this for you. See you in the next one.